So I'm going to talk about the dialogic space the Pedagogy of Multiliteracies created in my game-based teaching. I just finished a research report published in Ludic language pedagogy in which I looked at research reports of game-based language teaching. I looked at 28 papers published over the past 20 years or so and evaluated them in terms of theory, teaching, and research criteria. And it was disappointing that a lot of these reports reported theory and research results and teaching in terms of perhaps the context or some design work that the teachers did or the researchers did. But the actual teaching work that teachers did sort of during games and also after games was mostly absent, right? And I played around with that data in terms of framing it as being vaporware, as game-based language teaching being something that's been hyped and announced and people are getting excited about, but that it's never really been delivered. So I played around with this idea of the field, the research field, being vaporware, and that teaching doesn't really have concrete evidence to support the all the talk about game-based language teaching as well. This also connects to the ed tech hype cycle, where people find a technology, get excited about it, sort of fall in love with it, maybe try to make some money off it or play around with it, but then they pretty soon realize that the technology is not really doing what they hope it to do, and it's not really being normalized either the way that they wanted it to be. And so it's only through that consideration that things finally start to be used, right, in this sort of normalized, integrated way. And I think that there's the research reports that I published in the field shows a real clear need to try to integrate pedagogy and games in language and literacy teaching. Another thread that I've been interested in for a while are these keywords of who, why, how, and what. For example, this recent book by Arnseth, Hanghaj, and Silseth looks at games as tools for dialogic teaching and learning. This is a great book. And they present this model like the GTDT model, where they base it on a dialogic pedagogy and didactic circles around what should be learned, how it should be taught, and why it should be learned and taught, right? Why, how, and what. This directly connects to readings that I've done about the Pedagogy of Multiliteracies and the Learning by Design framework, right, by the New London Group and Cope and Kalantzis, looking at the why of the Pedagogy of Multiliteracies, the what they focus on, and how to actually enact this. The Pedagogy of Multiliteracies and the Learning by Design frameworks directly influenced my work on the game Terakoya project. Why I'm using this. I'm looking at the transformation of students in school and society. I'm looking at students' liberation, private, public, and professional participation, looking at games and discourses and affinity spaces. And the how is, of course, very important too, right? Like heavy mediation from me and materials, debriefing after games, a lot of analysis work and project work. And I've been publishing about this recently. So these threads of who, why, how, and what sort of cut through or perform, create this sort of skeleton that a lot of recent, really interesting work in games and language and literacy teaching, I think, is using. Like I said, I'm doing work in my game Terakoya, right, using the Pedagogy of Multiliteracies. And the Pedagogy of Multiliteracies, as I'm using it, has these 4 stages. A stage of experiencing, conceptualizing, analyzing, and applying or participating. You can think about experience as being game activities, so choosing and playing games deeply. Next is school activities, so discussion and research, conceptualizing, articulating, describing, and doing analysis work, so that typical academic work. And then application and participation. So again, like experience is sort of like the student's real world. Again, you're bringing it back out to the world through projects that develop students' abilities to do work and to volunteer, to just participate in civic societies and things like that. And so I'm taking these stages and building it into my game Terakoya. You can see the experiencing work here, the conceptualizing work here, the analyzing work here, and the applying work here. And I'll talk about this more. But I can give you a couple quick examples just to help you understand what I'm doing in my game Terakoya. So for example, again, right, so the experiencing work is here, conceptualizing work is here, analyzing and applying, those 4 stages. For example, a couple of years ago, a student and I played Railways of the World, right, this strategy board game. The student got really interested in the idea of the magic circle. So she's conceptualizing and articulating this idea that actions in a game are different than actions in the real world. She analyzed dozens of texts around the game, and then she participated by creating her own text, right? By writing and discussing a review posted to Board Game Geek, right? A hobby fan site about games, right? So again, bringing the students through these 4 stages. Another example is this that was done 2 years ago. One of my students got really interested in the fun theory projects, right, in Europe. This idea of like making things more fun to change people's behavior, right? So making recycling fun, or turning stairs into a piano to encourage people to use the stairs and to exercise instead of taking the escalator. She got really interested in this idea of fun and sort of behavior modification, right? And so she analyzed these examples and looked a little bit more at environmental problems here in Japan. And then she created her own board game, right? Print and play board game that parents can play with their kids to change the way they, for example, shop or move around town, right? And she reached out to the local newspaper, and the newspaper did a little story on her and featured her website and her game. And then so she could share her game, right? The game was a free print and play game. So people could read the newspaper article and then download that and hopefully explore changing their behavior. So those are a couple quick examples of the game Terakoya. And I'm going to be talking about the dialogic spaces in these different elements of the pedagogy of multiliteracies, right? So again, experiencing, conceptualizing, analyzing, and applying. That's the core loop in the game Terakoya. But even before that core loop, I think there's a really important dialogic space. Even before students start the core elements of the pedagogy of multiliteracies, we do a lot of pre-work. So there's an orientation phase before we even start this. So again, like sort of this dialogic space where I ask students to brainstorm who they are and also who they want to become, in 3 months or 6 months or 6 years or 10 years, whatever, in their life. So asking them to brainstorm things about their personal life, their public life, professional life. What do they learn? What do they know? Their connections in communities and their personality, right? Are they happy? Are they curious? And then taking those same questions and seeing what they want, who they want to be in the future, right? So again, those ideas of what, how, why, and who. This is all really about the who. And then why do they want this future? The reason why I do this is because the pedagogy of multiliteracies is based on this concept of transformation, right? Transformation of texts and students and society. And so to actually do this transformative work, I need to understand who students are and who they want to become. And so before the game Terakoya, before the pedagogy of multiliteracies even starts, I ask students these questions, whether on that worksheet I showed you or in a longer Google document, often dozens of pages long. They write about themselves. And then they share that with me before we even start. And I'm able to comment on things, ask questions, and then they come to the class, the seminar, and we spend a lot of time discussing their answers, right? What they wrote about themselves. They introduce themselves, right? The dialogic space. They introduce themselves using what they wrote. I and other students ask questions. And my job, right, that I use a dialogic approach to help students notice things in their answers. Things that I'm curious about, things that, trends and themes that I'm noticing in their work. I'm helping them see similarities to other students because they might, of course, like this idea of social capital or connections, building connections to other people. And they're not only connecting to other students, but also connecting to future work that we're going to do in the game Terakoya and beyond. So dialogue here is really a springboard, right? From their work to the discussion, we can use this as a springboard to future work and other things that we're going to do. There's another dialogic space. Of course, there's a ton of dialogue and interaction happening while we play the game. But but I'd like to focus on some other areas. So conceptualizing, right? So after the game, there's a dialogic space again. So students are playing games really purposefully. Again, there's this transformative backbone to the entire thing that we do. And so we're not just playing games randomly, we're playing very purposefully. We're choosing games that connect to who they want to be. And then we're also taking notes. So you can see my student here taking notes about this game that she was interested in terms of American culture and popular games and things like that. So she's taking notes, collecting data. After the game, they take time to reflect and write. So there's this priming stage where I've created worksheets or posters where they have to answer a lot of questions that I'm asking them about the game, about the language that they used, about their feelings, what happened, things that they noticed, right? So they're reflecting and writing. And then similarly to how they wrote about themselves, I see what they write, and then I react to students' ideas on paper. So I see maybe a concept map that a student's drawn, and I'm asking questions here and there and everywhere, or pointing them at themes. We take their ideas, my questions, and again, we discuss it deeply, right? And then in that dialogic space, I'm asking for clarifications. I'm asking them to articulate ideas. I'm asking them to give more reasons and examples, right? So starting to do that more academic and intellectual work, right? We're no longer just playing games, but we're moving into that intellectual and specialist language stage. I have to push them sometimes, right? And show them counter examples to the ideas that they shared, right? I use dialogue that way. And also connecting to other aspects of language, maybe in their first language, second language, about education and learning, different games, and also elements of society, right? So there's this dialogic space. A really concrete example of how this worked in one of my projects was, so I'm moving from this, using dialogue to help students conceptualize and participate, was this example. So a student and I played Uno by the rules. She knew Uno, I knew Uno. We played it. And then she analyzed Uno's rulebook. So she looked at the language, the verbs, the nouns in Uno's rulebook. I asked her for a lot of reasons and examples and what effect the language had. And through that dialogic process, she noticed must, and she said, "Oh, this is about rules, and rules are for a fair game, and we need to have a fair game to have fun." And so, as an example, right, I extemporaneously played tic-tac-toe with her. Right, we just drew a quick game of tic-tac-toe on a piece of paper, and I cheated on purpose. She drew an X, and I wrote O. And I said, "Great, I won." I got a really strong reaction from her, of course, right? And then based on that strong reaction, that's where this magic circle concept came, right? Like, why do you feel this way? What did I do? Why did it have this effect? And we started talking about the difference between just drawing lines on a piece of paper in the real world and drawing lines on a piece of paper in a game. There's a difference of experience and meaning in these two spaces. In the game Terakoya, I asked students to write an essay. She chose the magic circle, and she read various articles about the magic circle and wrote her essay explaining her experience of the magic circle in the games that we had played. Again, like that intellectual and academic work, right? So, hi. So, yeah, I'm just recording a video. It's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Hi. That's all right. You okay? Uh, and so she wrote this essay, and then she wanted to write a review for Board Game Geek. So she drafted her essay for Board Game Geek and showed it to me. We discussed it again, of course, at more dialogue, looking at how she applied the magic circle concept, trying to get her to give more reasons and examples. She posted the draft to Board Game Geek, and she decided to study the magic circle concept in her graduation thesis seminar. So dialogue led to conceptualization and also participation, right? She recognized that I listened to her ideas and asked her questions to guide her thinking and prompt deeper answers. She realized that the dialogic work that I did was much different than with friends or family, because her friends and family sort of just play, right? They just play games. And then she said, unless you ask such a thing, I just play games. Maybe I had no opportunity to connect the games in real society, right? So here's this connection between dialogue and conceptualization and participation. Another dialogic space is in the analysis work that students do. So after they start to articulate and explain their ideas and their experiences, one big project that students do in the game Terakoya and in the Pedagogy of Multiliteracies is, to kind of satisfy their curiosity. I help them to ask big questions and then to answer that big question. And here are some examples of students' work. Like after playing diplomacy, one student got very interested in the idea. She asked, who plays this game? What's the demographics of this? Are they men, women, educated, not educated, right? Um, and she did sort of detective work using their social media profiles. Other students looked at strategies of the game. Other students, again, are looking at sort of textual analysis and discourse analysis. Other students even get interested in the idea of like memory and concentration, like how does the brain work to play games? They use a lot of materials that I've made, right? So they start with the materials and then I mediate off of that, things like analysis sheets or grading rubrics. And then there have been successes and failures. So a couple examples of how I've supported students and how it succeeded was this, right? So students got interested in, like how do they asked me, like, how do we do discourse analysis? Well, try this, right? So I'm reframing this academic term again into some simpler terms, but still helping them. So try circling all the verbs. How are they different than the verbs in a recipe or in a love letter? Them looking at the verbs led to them looking at things like might happen, and then them being able to actually present an analysis of the rules. Other students started writing a strategy guide for diplomacy, which is great, right? That's a great idea. And I asked them, like, who is this for? Again, right, the idea of audience in the Pedagogy of Multiliteracies. And I suggested, like, how about posting it on Twitter, right? I want you to do something with it. Post it on Board Game Geek. Post it on YouTube, which blew the students' minds. Like they all said, like, this is too big. Those were the words that they used. That's too big of an idea. But with my help, and helping them see some examples, they were able to post it to YouTube. They put a PowerPoint together, they posted it to YouTube and tweeted about it. Other students were interested, in this, is this game educational for children, right? And how do we determine that? Well, try this, like describe each part, explain each part, then judge each part. There's David Buckingham's, right, media literacy education technique, right? So my dialogue here is sometimes giving them perspective, guiding them towards advanced work, asking for reasons and examples, right? Those are some simple successes, but I think this has also failed from time to time. So I see students work on those worksheets, and I said to a group of students, right, this is very shallow, right? Give me some reasons and details. I have some books in my office. I can help you, right? We can do a better job here. And the students didn't do anything. They said, like, this information is enough. I didn't change it, right? So they didn't actually take up that sort of dialogic baton, right? Other time in the same group, one of the girls in the group asked me, like, I don't know how to make a game. Can you please help me? A very simple request, right? Yeah, of course. That's what this class is about. I can show you some game prototypes. I can help you with your work. They never contacted me, right? They didn't come to my office, didn't contact me, and made quite a poor game. And then in the sort of debriefing about this, she admitted that part of my group didn't work. Usually the failures have happened in this dialogic space with sort of group work problems where I'm not able to talk for whatever reason to everyone, or there's some sort of intergroup conflict. That has definitely been a failure from time to time. Another interesting failure related to that example of Uno that I shared before is so. In that example of Uno before, we were playing Uno and talking about Uno, and my student said that she thought that the game was without any strategy, right? She said that Uno was a game based on luck, which it is. So I shared I found a review on Board Game Geek saying the title was A Game of Deep Strategy. And this is a deeply sarcastic, strongly sarcastic review of Uno. It was very funny. My student read it, and then she said, right, it's really interesting to read that Uno is a game of deep strategy. There were so many opinions I didn't have, right? And she started to agree with the article, right? Many novices fail to notice the ocean's depth of strategy, right? So she changed her mind. She noticed the strong words, But she, even through this, like, did you notice anything? Is this your opinion? Other dialogue, she took those at face value. I gave her a deeper textual analysis sheet to use to try to analyze that language. She still, right? She thought that the author was sharing tips and informing her of strategies. I had to directly tell her that the article was making fun of Uno, and then I supported my opinion with language in the review. The student then said, like, teachers shouldn't tell the truth, right? That's one way that we can use that's actually not really dialogic, right? Of me just explaining it. Students should notice, but I couldn't notice. Even though she knew what sarcasm was, she couldn't recognize it. She couldn't read the review for what it was. Then she reanalyzed it. She saw those expressions and she expressed culture shock, right? So I guess this is a failure, but she was able finally to understand what that was, right? What purpose the text had. So playing the game, debriefing, analyzing, finally participation, right? So this is also a dialogic space. So students, after they analyze some aspect of the game, after they have discussions with me and other students, they plan a project, to use their skills and knowledge and language outside of the classroom. And so there is another worksheet, a project proposal where they have to, come up with an idea. Are they going to make a game? Are they going to hold an event? Are they going to interview a game designer, make a T-shirt, run a charity event? All these things, and they have to plan, right? Who, what, when, where, how, why, and these sorts of things. They do this in a Google Doc. I'm able to make lots of comments, and then we discuss those, of course, deeply as well. So it's very similar, right? So they come up with their ideas. I'm using dialogue here and also in the face-to-face meetings really to recognize their efforts, right? This is them applying their skills, but also pushing them for more meaningful effort and results, giving them different suggestions, helping them find people to work with, things like that. So discussing really deeply. And then students do complete a project, running an event, making a board game, tweeting, posting something online. And finally, right, so I started by talking about this pre-work. The last stage after this sort of core pedagogy of multiliteracy sequence is the final stage. And this is a dialogic space as well, right? I talked before about how it's about transformation. And so there is this deliberate dialogic space at the end where students are writing about themselves, right? Well, step by step, what did you do? What steps were there? What did you learn? What did you realize? What did you recognize? What can you do now that you couldn't do before? Giving reasons and examples. And me as well. Like I have a background in educational technology, right? I have educational research. And so I'm able to look at the trends and the data points and help them see connections between things that they realize about themselves, and showing them those connections. And we discuss those steps, right? And so the students and I use those experiences. We use this dialogic space to help the students see transformation. And so this diagram is an example of a thesis student who reflected on all the work that she did over 2 years in the game Terakoya, where here are the stages of the game Terakoya, right, and Pedagogy of Multiliteracies. These are the people that were involved, right? How did different people affect those different stages? And then those were her ideas, right? How did she develop? What did she notice about herself? What was she able to do, right? And so she's able to use those experiences to see transformation. So the dialogic space, right? The pedagogy of multiliteracies created in my game-based teaching, right? As you can see, right, I really did consider the learning goals before starting the pedagogy, right? So why am I teaching with games? Why am I teaching? What's the purpose of teaching and learning here? I chose a pedagogy that matched the why. In this case, was the pedagogy of multiliteracies. And then I had to focus on the goals and action of each step. So I'm focusing on the what in each step of the pedagogy of multiliteracies. I realized that I needed to make more materials and also mediate more. So the how changed. And then I asked more questions because of the why, the pedagogy, the what, and the how. I asked more questions and did more work before, during, and after games, right? Asking students to reflect more, react more, articulate more, clarify, explain, and connect. So the why of the pedagogy created the need for dialogue. And then dialogue scaffolded pre- and post-game transformation and learning. I've been keeping lists of lessons learned and takeaways, and I've been pushing these into the papers that I've been writing lately, right? And just a couple. If you want to just freeze the frame, you can look at it. But definitely, purposefully integrating games in pedagogy, I think, can radically change what and how and why students learn. And I'd really like people, the teachers, especially and researchers, to think, why are we using games? How are we using games? And what kind of games and what kind of materials are we learning? So I think that if you purposefully integrate those, it can radically change what happens in the classroom and outside the classroom. Number two, what teachers can do with games can be broader and be more important than what students can do on their own or with materials, right? Like that example of my student not recognizing purposes of texts or recognizing academic concepts. Because we're in this, where we have an opportunity in the classroom, we can interact with students. There are these dialogic spaces, and we should be using those to broaden and deepen what students are doing, right? We can help them do more. And number six, right? If you want your students to think, then ask them questions, right? That provoke them to do so, right? What do you mean? Why is this important? How do you feel? Right? You've got to ask them questions that provoke them to think. Sometimes students are not going to think on their own. I realized I needed to slow down a lot in order to have the chance to make and see some difference in my students, right? I really would love to point you at James York's Vaporwave paper in Ludic language pedagogy, this idea of slowing teaching down. I like James, I used to blast through games and activities and projects, but I've really found that using the pedagogy of multiliteracies and slowing things down, right? Whether it's most of my classes are either 4 weeks or 16 weeks or even 2 years, slowing down really has given me the chance to make and see a difference in my students. And I also think number 11, right? I react to students' ideas instead of prioritizing my own goals. I found that if I ask students a question, right, these questions that provoke them to think, and then giving them a space to share their answers, and me encouraging and supporting and reacting and asking them to explain it more, this has had a huge effect. And I really do see students growing more, understanding more, developing those academic and intellectual skills. This really sort of holistic bottom up approach is working so much better in my pedagogical space than me prioritizing my own goals. So thank you very much for listening to this short talk. I'm the co-editor of Ludic Language Pedagogy. This is an open access, open peer-reviewed journal that looks at integrating ludic language and pedagogy, so play and drama and language play and all sorts of things, games, simulations, first language, second language, literature, and also pedagogy, different ways of teaching. So if you've got something that you're working on, or if you'd like to join our community, please check us out, right? There's our Twitter account, here's the website, and we have an open Slack with about 100 teachers and researchers and designers from all over the world. We've got a really supportive community. So I encourage you to join. Thanks very much for listening to me talk about the game Terakoya. Again, my name is Jonathan deHaan, and you can reach me through email, through Twitter, or find out some more information online. Thanks a lot.